Is it possible for God to make mistakes? Apparently so. Hiraku Machio was an innocent man who experienced the punishments of a sinner. Because his God was mistaken, he suffered betrayal and scorn until he was 39 years old. That is when he died due to a terminal disease. A sad story, isn't it? But God wanted to pay for this mistake by giving Hiraku the chance to live in another life, with a body full of health and some other wish he might want to. And what could be better than being a farmer? Yes, even God was surprised. He didn't want to be a model or a multimillionaire or anything like that. Just a simple farmer who, with the help of the goddess of agriculture, was able to realize his dream and to facilitate his new life with an omnipotent tool. Hiraku woke up in the middle of a forest. The first thing he did was to observe his surroundings, and not finding a river, he dug deep enough to find a water source. The risk of getting lost was always present, so he chose a large tree as his home and landmark. Like every beginning, the protagonist had a hard time building his first house, but having his divine tool, he was never tired. This tool even worked as a weapon when defending himself against a wild rabbit monster of that world. At least for one day, the farmer was able to guarantee his food with the improvised hunt. However, the priority was agriculture. Hiraku noticed that simply by imagining the harvest and plowing the land, it was enough for the first sprouts to start growing. So he raised a protective fence for himself and his harvest, also providing shelter for any other visitors. And so were a couple of wolves from hell that appeared wounded on the farm, whom the protagonist helped and adopted. The only serious problem was the energy. Harvesting with a tool was one thing, producing fire with it was another. Besides everything, God had made a mistake again by sending that newly reborn soul to a dangerous place, the forest of death. A place where Hiraku, surprisingly, was able to adapt very well. And with the first harvest in hand, now he had to deal with learning how to survive in the winter. It didn't get that hard because a spider from hell appeared, which is the main character named Sauton. By the way, he named the wolves Kuro and Yuki, the last one being female as well as the spider. Each of them had their own offspring. With the help of Sabaton's spider webs, he endured the winter in peace. When the season had passed, the puppies were all wolves who left the farm to look for mates and later returned to increase the family, just like the spider, who was not only in charge of watching over the farm, but also over her little ones who once they grew up, they left. Faced with all this, the protagonist felt alone, although for a very short time because then a cute vampire appeared who the wolves cornered. This creature was named Lucy. Her girlish form grew once she sucked the protagonist's blood, but when she was attacked by wolves, she returned to her initial form. Lucy became the protagonist's wife, so she also got space to continue her research while hiding from the aristocratic family that was after her. A few days later, Sabaton's alarm is heard. This time, the wolves had caught a cute angel who was chasing Lucy and was a bit more powerful than the vampire. This girl's name was Tia. Hiraku also adopted her to avoid being beholden to the bounty that was asked for Lu. Lovely elf girls arrived to help with the work that was piling up, while finding a place to live and reproduce. The elves came to a place where they could escape the war and use their knowledge of architecture and blacksmithing to improve home comfort. Now, with more people, it was possible to build a canal to divert a river that was far away. The construction brought with it hellish fish, with which Hiraku made a tasty meal. With this new water source, he could make a rice patty and enjoy a nice bowl of rice that he had missed for a long time. He almost ran out of food due to how much the girls liked it, who, by the way, had the facility to clean themselves with magic. That was an advantage not available to the protagonist, who built a hot water bath once he could count on the magical fire of the girls. Water pollution was not a concern, since the slimes were there to purify the water by consuming all the waste produced on the farm. Kuro, the wolf, looked back and remembered when he was found by Hiraku. Before, he used to fight alone against other wolves, and never lost until he was confronted by his wolf female, Yuki. Since then, they stayed together and fell prey to a bear that almost ate him, until they found a good shelter, and so we saw how their family grew, just as the protagonist's harvests were growing. This time, the seasonings were not to the wolves' liking, but the rest liked it for the taste given to the food prepared by Hiraku. Such was the success of the place that the elves kept arriving and expanding the house. Unlike the previous winter, this time Hiraku had more company, more food, and more fun with the board games he created. The snow melted and a new season arrived. However, a danger was waiting for them at the gates of the radiant sun. A rebirth attacked the farm. It was a kind of dragon who threatened to set everything on fire. So, in his desire to save what he had built, Hiraku invoked a spirit and with a single blow destroyed the enemy. That omnipotent tool was Grimey's sacred spear, a weapon that consumed the vital force of its owner. But since the protagonist was blessed with so much health, any vitality that the weapon drained from him, the next day he recovered it. Without knowing it, Hiraku had amassed a great strength that aroused fear in his neighbors, starting with the demonic realm that saw his wyvern fall. As in any good hunt, they ate the fallen wyvern and the meat was quite a delight. The only missing thing for the feast was a good wine, which they didn't take long to prepare now that there were plenty of it to crush the grapes with. Everything was going so well that people kept arriving. First, Lucy's sister, a pretty vampire named Flora, who stayed a few days investigating the place. A few days later, they were joined by strong and efficient ogre maids, along with lizard men who brought with them chickens and of course their brute strength. Then, more elves joined in. In order not to be outnumbered, Tia brought with her more angels to stand guard at the farm that was no longer a farm but a village because of all the people who had joined. For that reason, the protagonist called them all together to decide the name of the place, which was named the Big Tree Village. There was a big celebration where Hiraku was chosen as mayor. His first tasks were to expand the influence of the village. Hiraku agreed to pay 10% of the harvest to the demonic realm, despite the unknown military advantage they had. On the other hand, the great dragon dreamer visited them, and with the delights of the wine that the village had, the Dragon Kingdom established good diplomatic agreements. Also, a trade agreement was made with the beast men, who were incorporated as part of the village's population. The only dilemma Hiraku had as mayor was the small proportion of men compared to women. Everything seemed quite calm, but when a beast girl saved a boy from falling using her magic, our protagonist wondered if he was the only one who couldn't use magic, since all the others could use it very easily. Later, while Hiraku was cutting fruit from a tree, an earthquake was suddenly felt. A guardian angel reported that a large bird and a snake were fighting in the northern area of the forest, so Hiraku asked to be taken there to try to solve it. With a single spear attack, he managed to kill them both and then make them the meal of the day. Later, they were visited by a group of dwarves led by a man named Donoan, who came to negotiate about the very good quality alcohol that the farm produced. They didn't have money, but they had technology, so they made an alliance to produce a much higher quality alcohol, and showed them the creation process for making a very strong corned whiskey. Eventually, they also stayed in the village to work. Our protagonist realized that he was gradually getting more men in the village, but those dwarfs' tastes were a bit odd compared to what he had to offer. On the next day, it seems they were attacked by a dragon. A second dragon named Dreamer protected the village, and then a third one joined in, which looked even more dangerous. Hiraku tried to attack him, but he failed. When he tried again, he was stopped by a young servant of the Dragon Kingdom. since the two dragons were Lastis Moon and Grafalon, the king's wife and daughter. They came because they noticed Dreamer's constant and suspicious escapades to visit the town. Everything ended well. They understood the importance of their relationship with the small town which had the power to stand up to them. Hiraku's missed shot was actually Grafalon's spider friend who saved her. For this reason, Lastimon was given the mission to stay there for a while in order to establish a much stronger relationship with the people. Hiraku craved some seafood and ordered it from the coastal city of the demonic realm. To his surprise, he got ingredients to replicate dishes he remembered from his previous world. He also met Michael Goro, an important merchant in charge of the entire coastal region, who wanted to get to know the village in order to manage his products, which were recognized as being of high quality. At first, transportation was a problem, but thanks to Last Moon, this was solved. Then, another dragon named Hakure appears, who is Dream's sister. At the beginning, she arrived making trouble because she wanted to know who her niece, Lastismoon, was going to marry. Her brother had promised her that he would find a husband for her, and since he did it first with Lastismoon, she didn't think it was fair. Ren had to clear up the situation with her sister to avoid getting hurt. However, because of all the mess she caused, she had to stay in the village to repair it. They realized that Hakure was too lazy to work, but when she was put to teach the children, Hiraku found that she was quite good at it, so she stayed doing something in the village. Hakure asked about the board games that had been invented in the village. This ended up awakening the competitive spirit of the dragons. They placed bets and the protagonist ended up naked in front of everyone. Later on, Hiraku discovered that his dogs had caused a mess in a nearby labyrinth. In that dungeon, they attracted some lamias, a kind of snakes that, frightened, asked to talk in the village to see if they would accept their precious stones in exchange for their crops. The protagonist agreed. The lamias had to cover their bodies a bit since they were part of an agreement with a delivery network to transport the village products to more places. However, the fact that Hakure was in the village caused quite a lot of fear to the Demon Kingdom because that way the village had the power to conquer any nation if they felt like it. So while the council discussed whether to raise an army, the Demon King only worried about the whims of his daughter, who was more hysterical than usual. She was worried about her friend Lauren, to whom some annoying girls of the kingdom's nobility made her think about attacking the village and rescuing her friend. Lauren found out and sent some lamias to the demonic army that was going to arrive at the village. And those warriors, seeing the strength of the lamias, backed down and didn't attack anything. Lauren called those girls and the princess for them to be punished for such a mistake. Princess Yuri got to know the place where her friend worked and saw that it wasn't as bad as the rumors said. The three noble girls, in their first attempts to escape, resigned themselves to work in the town hall. When their punishment passed, these girls tasted the tasty food of the place and decided to stay. And as if they needed it, more elves arrived in the village. The protagonist had no problem in knowing these girls. They knew fire magic and supposedly they knew how to hunt, but when they tried to hunt some local beast, they couldn't because that ecosystem was in another league for them. So Hiraku put them to collect clay to make more dishes. A new dungeon appeared and the group of elves asked to explore it because there was a kind of snake that was known to be an aphrodisiac. As soon as the winter began, Lucy realized that she was pregnant by the protagonist. Winter passed and the days were quiet in the village. That the pregnancy was such an extraordinary event that Lucy's grandfather, a vampire named Progenitor, came to visit them. When he entered the village and saw the statue of the god who had consecrated Hiraku, he knelt down. After that, when everything was calm, he told a little of his story, or rather of what he didn't remember, since to keep his youth, he had to erase his memories in order to continue living. After finding out that his granddaughter was in good hands, he asked the protagonist to sell him the statue of the god. Hiraku refused to do it, but offered to make a new one in exchange. When the sculpture was finished, he made this ancient vampire very happy, who said goodbye to the town, leaving him the blessing for his relationship with Lucy. Afterwards, he arrived at a temple where he placed the statue that surpassed those of other well-known artists. Although, in order to protect the privacy of the protagonist, no mention was made of him anywhere. Although Hiraku refused to receive the gift in return, he still received a piano as a gift from progenitor. This aroused curiosity and fear in the other girls, because although they wanted to play that piano, they were afraid of breaking it. But then, Hiraku ordered her to buy more pianos for the others to practice with, even though they didn't let him sleep because they were practicing a lot. The magic moment arrived. Lucy received gifts and attention from everyone. She began to feel the contractions, so everyone went into action to welcome the mayor's son. And so a cute, healthy albino baby boy was born. Hiraku experienced something that in his past life he would have never imagined. He meditated on this in the place where he was the first time he arrived in that world. As a demonstration of gratitude, he gave medals to everyone, with which they could exchange things and also had their own local currency. Everyone in the village had avoided alcohol because Lucy couldn't drink due to her pregnancy. But since the baby was born, they could drink alcohol, so they all celebrated with wine. On the next day, it was reported that more elves needed a place to stay, so the other elves proposed to build a second village. Hiraku was hesitant. However, all the girls offered their help. And so begins another new adventure, concluding the one we have just seen.